Hi, I'm Debra Hamilton. Welcome to my podcast, Why Do Pets Matter? 10 years ago, with my iPhone and a script, I recorded the first episode of the Ultimate Pet Resolution Summit, which chatted with experts about conflicts over animals. Our conversations were intimate, honest, and illustrated how disagreements over animals occur and how those disagreements can reshape people's lives and relationships. In November 2019, I started Why Do Pets Matter, a new podcast that continued these informative discussions. I'm so excited to have you here with me, continuing my exploration into a more meaningful conversation about why pets matter to all of us. My guests and I will share ideas, stories, and experiences straight from the heart, unscripted and holistic. From the bravest moments to the most brokenhearted, we will explore how to resolve disagreements over animals differently. One thing I know for sure is I want to have more meaningful conversations that will help all of us unlock that deeply felt human-animal bond that drives the emotions of conflict. Hi, it's Debra Hamilton, and today we're going to talk to Ron Sosa. He is sort of my soulmate. We both work with veterinarians and veterinarian practice members, plus clients, to make it a peaceful place in which to live. Ron talks about neurodiversity and building bridges and having the ability to look at different points of view as gifts and not as things to get angry about or to shift or to change. So let's see what Ron has to say. Hi, I'm so glad you're here. It's Debra Hamilton, and I'm here with Ron Sosa. He's the founder and CEO of Synaptic Neuro-Inclusive Leadership, which is fabulous, and also very involved with a good friend of mine, Andy Rourke, in their Uncharted Veterinary Conferences as the executive director. Ron, thanks so much for coming. I'm so glad you're here today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. We've been chatting here and there, and I just absolutely love and adore talking with you. And like you said, we're kindred spirits, and we've got a lot in common, so I love it.
We're always trying to have people listen, actively listen to each other before they jump to conclusions, which makes the workspace and life in general so much better. So I'm so glad you're here. I'm going to ask you the first question, which is, why
Yeah.
do pets matter to you, Ron? And then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I think that pets matter to me because they don't have a voice of their own, and we can really be advocates in many different ways. We can be an owner advocating for the health and well-being for our pet. We can be on the medical side that is advocating for, the treatment and the wellness and the preventive and all of the things that happen in the pet's health space. We can be advocates in so many different ways, but being able to speak for those who can't speak for themselves is really in a lot of ways, the theme of my life.
That's such an important piece because a lot of people feel as if they're speaking for their pets, and the veterinarians are hopefully helping owners understand what it is that they need to do for their pets. And sometimes conflicts can arise in
Mm,
that discussion because having it in a way that is respectful of everyone's expertise, me knowing my dog better, a veterinarian knowing the medicine better. I'm sure you've been involved in some of those
oh yeah.
conversations, or at least overheard what some of those conversations were like. And it's really difficult.
Yeah, I love what I think Jessica Vogelsang said it in an analogy that veterinarians and the veterinary professionals should consider themselves the Gandalf in the Lord of the Rings series, right? So they're the sage, they are the advisors, they are the ones that you come to for advice, but we aren't the ones to tell you what to do with your pet. Like the hero of the story is the pet owner, and they get to decide and choose what the best path is for their pet. And so I've really stayed true to that. It's something I've believed in without having the words beforehand. But hearing her say that several years ago, it's really resonated with me, and I use it all the time now. Like I'm here to give you advice. I'm not here to judge your choices. This is what you decide to do. This is what I can educate you in the best way possible. And then I've done my job, and I don't feel like I have to take on the burden of the emotional turmoil or the compassion fatigue and the things that set in our industry. Like I can leave all that behind because my job is to advise and give, educate, and that's it, and walk away.
That is such an important understanding to have. And often it's hard to have. And often you might try it, but your body language may belie you because we're human, and we might be saying words that our eyes or our face or our body language are not transmitting to the other party. And
Yeah.
our body language might be fine, but the other party might be feeling a little guilty. And in your neck of the woods, what you do, which is usually help practices run really well, as much collaboration as they can, this is something that probably is top of mind for most of the people you help.
Yeah, I think so. What I really try to do is, the when we boil it all down, I just want people to talk to people. Like, we are all human beings. We all have, feelings and want to be heard, and we all want to, be able to feel heard with giving our points, but also feel heard in the opposite of whatever's going on in conflict. And the ability to just listen and hear what the other party says, and be able to receive what they say as a gift, and not I'm slinging this sort of justice around. Like, no, this is a gift. What you're giving me is a gift, and what I can do with that gift when I know what you're thinking is has very few limits on it. And so that's how I like to think of as conflict. Is It's a gift that I can take, unwrap, and then give you a gift on how I'm feeling and what I'm seeing and my perspective in life, and let's figure out how those go together.
That's so important because in your job, so tell us a little bit more about what you do in the service of animals. But it
Mhm.
seems to me that what you're trying to do for the people you're helping is create some space for them to feel grounded, to actively listen to what someone's saying, and understand that people think differently, which is really hard for us to do as humans.
Yeah, so on the neurodiversity end, I like to create awareness. I like to, I think of it as the disc profile of our mind, right? We talk about communication styles, we talk about, personality styles, but let's talk about brain chemistry style. Like, this is how different brains work, and let's create some awareness around that. That's step one, right? Advocacy. And then let's turn that into how can we utilize that information in a positive, inclusive way in our practices with our clients, with our teams, with the people we, side by side humans that we work around, and then also our different perspectives to hand each other gifts, right? To help learn, to help expand our perception, our perspective in life. And so that's really what it's truly about, is let's create awareness, and then the next step is how can I use that awareness, and hopefully, in an ideal world, you use that awareness next time you create a brand new practice, or we open a new practice, or we open a new business. Now we have this from the ground up, and how can we make it even more inclusive rather than just, taking the secondary tools? Let's primarily think about inclusivity, the human that operate the business, and then create, a paradise around that.
That's so important when we look at different workspaces,
Yeah.
because it really does make it function a great deal better if we can have different points of view, different ways of thinking, different intuitiveness of people coming in and hearing, seeing, smelling, feeling the way things are going to help us understand both the people we're working with and also the people we're working for, i.e., the clients and their pets, because it's important to have that synergy. I often talk about diffusing conflicts in a practice when clients are involved. And you just said that, it's a gift if you
Hmm.
hear something that's going to be a little different than what you said. And I found sometimes it's not necessarily looked at as a gift at all.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's
It's
looked at as pushback.
Yeah, it's immediately raises defenses. But if we can stop for a second, take that pause, and realize they've handed you a gift, this is what they're thinking, this is what they're feeling. I can now work with that. I have the ability to go, okay, I see you, I hear you, and how can I connect it so that you understand what I'm also trying to get across to you? And so I might be the only one who likes conflict in this world, I think sometimes, but I really do use it, if I can get in the right mindset. That's the other thing. Like, sometimes I'm not in the right mindset to have that conflict, and therefore I shouldn't engage. But if when I'm in the right mindset, like, it really is such a powerful thing to have conflict.
I love that because that's exactly what respecting and understanding neurodiversity
Hmm.
Gates is the ability to understand if you are neurodiverse and you have different things, recognizing, as you said, if I'm in the right mind space, if I'm grounded, then I can have a really good conversation. And if I'm not, I have to recognize that. And when I talk to veterinarians in conferences and people who work in the animal field, kennel operators, groomers, owners, breeders, I always say if somebody says something that really triggers you, you know it's triggering you. You feel it. You feel
Oh
it.
yeah, the rumbling right from the gut up. Yeah, yeah, totally.
Just breathe. Just breathe
Yeah.
in and out. Just breathe in and out. And if you think, wow, this is not working, I am still really feeling oppositional, defiant, reactive and defensive.
Mhm.
And so my go-to, and probably when you teach these classes, your go-to is this similarly like this. This is a lot of information you've given me, and thank you so much. And can we get back together in about, an hour or maybe a day, so we both can do a little research and we can be in a better place to have this conversation? Would that be okay?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I've never had anybody have come back to me and say they said no.
But we're so afraid of that no that we don't give it the chance. That fear of rejection is pretty deep within us. And so, you know, and oftentimes we wind up getting the rejection we know we're going to get by avoiding that of
But
saying,
you set
let's come
yourself
back to
up for
this.
the rejection. You set it up. You go, I'm going to be
Yeah.
rejected. They're not going to agree with me. I'm going to feel really bad. And if you just, I remember giving some courses during COVID, and I was teaching at Green Cross in Australia, not in Australia, but in Australia. And one of the veterinarians said to me, "What do you mean we don't need to answer them right away?" And I said, "Sometimes it'll be very good for everyone if you just say, you've given me a lot of information and I've given you a lot of information. Let's take a minute and let's
Mhm.
get back in touch with each other tomorrow." But I don't know, Ron, do you have the same issue I have with a lot of my clients who want help in how to communicate, is that they then don't want to pick up the phone tomorrow?
Yeah, I think we are all searching in various aspects of our life and career. We're all searching for the magic bullet, right? So the least amount of effort to give us the maximum amount of, outcome. And I just don't think that's possible. And we've got to put in the effort. We've got to, have the activation energy so that it's easier later. But if I can stretch that muscle of conflict, I feel like you will get to a place where it does become easier. It becomes, you start to look at it as a gift, and then the magic bullet somehow appears later as you stretch that muscle, is how I think of it.
I I love that because it really does take a little bit of time to understand how you're processing information before you
Yeah.
can understand how someone else is processing information. So I want to go back to the neurodiversity because
Yeah.
it is such a new concept. And I would venture to say, with all love and affection, that a lot of people who go into veterinary medicine are so smart and
Mm.
so empathetic and think about things differently that they may have a larger percentage of people who think differently, react
Mhm.
differently, have different synapses in their brain firing differently. Because, I mean, look at Temple Grandin. She is the commensurate neurodiverse person who advocates for animals. And
Yeah.
so I think that it is not uncommon to find people in a veterinary practice who are neurodiverse.
Yeah, I agree. I have no basis on this, right? I wish I could dive into the research. Maybe that's my
We'll
next
have to
job.
do that together.
But I definitely have this gut feeling that our profession definitely draws in the more, divergent minds, because I think there's safety in the human animal bond. I think that if we grown up with animals, I think, we feel that safety, we know that safety, and we want to be able to help that safety and continue that for others. And so, yeah, I think in my personal experience, I have found that when I owned a practice, like I tend to have, I don't know if that's who I drew in or if that's what practices do, but I definitely feel there is a larger percentage of neurodivergent individuals in our profession. Like I just see it. And most of us, if you're our age or older, you weren't diagnosed early, right? If you and some of us don't
At
even know to
all.
seek diagnosis. I didn't know to seek diagnosis until I went to anger management for couples counseling, because that's what I was going on in my life. And so that low level frustration was the first clue to ADHD. And then a couple of years later, I got my autism diagnosis, which like blew my mind. I had no idea. And then you go down that rabbit hole of learning all of these neurodivergents, and how they work in the brain. It's just so fascinating, and I do think it lends very, very well to the human animal bond.
I have to agree with you because it's so I'm over 50, I'm over 60. And in my neck of the woods, when I was younger, most of the teachers would say I was just lazy. I'm really
Mm,
smart. I was just lazy. And my
I
parents, of
got
course,
that.
punish me because I was lazy. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So probably like you, there were no, it's so great for kids now, yes and no, because sometimes they're over labeled, but that's a whole nother thing. But that you worked at finding what worked for you. So for me, things were like mnemonics. I did mnemonics all the time. I couldn't remember anything. So I would just build mnemonics, and I had hundreds of mnemonics. I mean, when I passed the bar association, I think I had 84 mnemonics to pass the bar. So,
Yeah.
these are the things we used because we didn't know there was anything wrong with us.
Hmm.
This isn't this how everybody learns stuff? Isn't this, and I always was wondering how kids who didn't have any notes could finish the test. I'm like, how do you do that? But so we're now recognizing, and you've written two great articles that I'm going to attach to the
Mm.
podcast. One is about bridges, and the other
Yeah.
is about writing an employee request form, sort of like going on what is it, Indeed, and writing a description of the job that actually will help people who are neurodiverse understand the tasks of the job. I think we get stuck in these, you used one of them, team player,
Mhm.
these jargon words that people who are neurodiverse may or may not see themselves as team players because they're a little put off by teams having
Yeah,
people.
because we tend to excel in solo, projects, which is fine in a lot of ways, right? Because if you're a technician, you're handling an exam room as a solo, right? Now, doesn't mean you don't come into the treatment room and handle it as a team, but a majority of their job is actually in solo in the exam room. And so that's not a problem. But what is the definition of a team player? And what that means to you isn't necessarily what it means to me. And so if as a neurodivergent person, I'm starting to look at job ads and go, and that's why I never really understood what the jobs entailed, is because we use these terminology, which makes sense to the person writing it, but doesn't always make sense to the people reading it and the people you're trying to invite into your business or your practice.
And your practice, it's so important to bring people in. I always use the visual of, you're all in the boat rowing and everybody has a different oar, but you're all rowing in
Hmm.
the same direction. And you have to respect that people like short oars, people like long oars, they like, concave or convex or whatever. So it's always something that is what you're looking for. So
Yeah.
for me, it is important that when we are looking for people to work in our space, that we all feel comfortable. And the other thing that I really liked about it was between the article on bridges and the article on writing a good job ad, is that they would have agency. And a lot of
Hmm.
times that agency is what will help a neurodiverse person be able to function.
Yeah. Well, and I want to take out, the fact number one, I want to say is I don't want to diagnose people. I don't want employers going out there and going like, oh, you must be neurodiverse because I think you're experiencing all these things that I'm going to judge you now on. So that number one, that's not the case. I think the part of this advocacy is just understanding that there's different brain chemistries and how they work. Number two is in knowing how these brains work and knowing, I think, or at least my experience of knowing that there's a lot more neurodivergent individuals within our profession, and we're all fighting the talent war because of the scarcity of technicians and vets for the number of hospitals in our country, is we can do a better job of serving the people and retaining the people if we just change up some language. And it's not anything atrocious. I'm not saying that you need to have a specific job ad for neurodivergent people and a specific job ad for everyone else. It's not marginalized that way. It's,
No.
can we tweak some wording and understand that not everybody's going to understand what team player means to them is also the same thing it means to you. That's really what it comes down to, is we can be a little bit more inclusive in our language and I think win the talent war.
I have to agree because the bottom line is that to be collaborative is defined differently by other people, but really makes a big difference in a practice. And when you're looking to hire people, to keep people, having them have the feeling that they can trust sharing what they're feeling with the rest of the group, I think is something that is not as valued as it should be.
Mm,
I often say that some of the greatest ideas will come from one of the quietest people in your office
yep.
because
Because
they're
they're only going to speak up
yeah,
until it hits a certain point.
yeah, everybody has to have the ability to speak up, and the quiet one is wonderful. And every once in a while, you should go have a cup of coffee with a quiet one.
Absolutely. I recently wrote a little piece for AHA Newsstat. I think you would love, and it was talks about how hiring and fit and culture can actually be a lot of unintentional bias. And I say unintentional very adamantly because I don't think people go out saying like, and me as a leader, I have for many years have said, let's hire for fit and let's hire for culture and try to like improve our culture. But that pendulum has swung, I think, a little too far on the other end, where now hiring for fit and culture has caused a lot of biases against even neurodivergent individuals because it creates, a homogenized workplace, which then means you could have less conflict in the sense of stale and no creativity, and you're just doing the same thing, and there's no one there to, challenge the status quo. And I think you need people in your practice in any business to challenge the status quo. And I think that's where, in my mind, neurodivergent individuals will do really well. I want to, as Andy Rourke always says, jump out of the plane and rebuild it. But then again, once we've rebuilt it and I'm not happy with it, I want to jump out again and rebuild it as we go down. Like until I perfected it. And then once I perfect it, I want to do it again and turn it into a helicopter. Right. Like, so
Because
I
it's
think
never
that
perfect.
it's never perfect. And when it is, it's boring. And so in neurodivergence, we don't do well with boring. We want the dopamine rush of challenging the next status quo.
I love that. Andy and I had a lot of conversations, and he's the founder of Uncharted Vet, which is a conference group that really looks outside the box for veterinary medicine and education and CEs. And one of his articles, and I use it in some of my points, is toxic people fire the toxic people. And my caveat to that is,
Mm,
and you're taking yourself with you. So if there are
yeah.
toxic people in your practice, if you don't do the internal work, which you said, right? You've built
Mhm.
this, everything's running great. Now, what do I need to look at to make sure I can make it better? You have to look at yourself first. Yes, indeed, there are toxic people. And I think, and I don't know, I'm pretty sure you probably use this. I think exit interviews are the most important pieces of a practice.
I think I have a love-hate relationship with exit interviews. I think that they can be used for good. I think once we start using them to check a box and don't actually use the information coming out of them, then they lose their luster a bit. So I have a love-hate. It's if you're gonna do something with it, absolutely. It's like my love-hate with a checklist. Like, what is the purpose of the checklist? And then what are we doing with that purpose? Right. So
You just move
yeah,
the checklist down the block. Yeah. And so when I say an exit interview, I always presume my bias that in fact the information you get from it, you're going to really explore and
mhm,
see others, when Ron left, he said this and this and this. What do you all feel? And I want you to feel this is safe space to let me know if what, and then of course the other piece is they have to feel safe to be able to say to me, yeah, he's right. This is not good and that's not good and whatever. And of course,
yeah.
that's the piece that you're working with as well, is creating that dynamic that enables people to be such a part of the practice that they can speak up.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think the piece is if you're not going to use it, don't do it. And when people ask me about 360 interviews or exit interviews, I'm like, if you're not going to do anything with the information, don't even waste your time.
Well, that is the reason for the interview, is to use the information coming out of it,
Mhm.
because of course, as I said, you're taking yourself with you. So there is something there that probably, if nothing else, you as the practice owner or the manager or both might need to hear and go, wow, I didn't see that coming. And what can I do
Yeah.
to make sure? And let me sort of check in to see if others are feeling that way. This is the
Hmm.
way, because when we're running it, so I go in and help practices and you go in and help practices, but we have to self-check ourselves that our biases aren't running rampant. So
Hmm.
it really is something that helps us. When I get feedback from practices or from conferences where I've spoken, I always say, wow, that is really an insightful piece. And, at first I might, and I'll own up to it, say, what are you, crazy? Because that's our natural reaction. What are you, crazy? I
Yeah.
covered it
It's
four
the initial
times.
emotional. Yeah.
I covered it four times. What's wrong with you? And then I say, wait a minute, if I covered it four times and they missed it, then I must have covered it in a way they couldn't hear it.
Yeah.
And so that's on me. That's not on them. That's on me.
Mhm.
And as you rightly point out, people learn differently. I'm an audio visual scribe learner. So I have to do
Mm.
all, and maybe that's the thing. I have to create something that helps people who are scribe learners
Yeah.
write this down. I remember when I took the bar exam, I took the Peeper bar exam, and he was audio, he was visual, and he was scribe. And he would say, rule, write this down. And so you would see it, you'd hear it, and you'd be
Yep.
writing it. And, if you're neurodiverse, holy Toledo, that's what you might need to do.
Yeah, I think that there's something with using all of the learning styles. It definitely helps any brain. So if you can tack all of them, you've hit your entire audience, right? I think there's something good to that. Uh, One thing I wanted to say, like you had mentioned the toxic team member and the exit interview, and I wanted to go back for a second
Sure.
because one of the things I really struggle with is the label of toxic, right? What is Again, I go back to what number one, what is the definition of toxic? But also, I think that keeping an understanding and learning that bridge that we had talked about in my other piece was the bridge to understanding and awareness of neurodivergence will actually help, I think, delabel some behaviors as toxic if we have some better understanding of who people are as a person. And so I think we're quick to use the label if it's something that we don't like or reject or don't understand. And it's a quick and easy way to say, oh, that workplace is toxic or that person is toxic. And just because let's say they are toxic for this culture doesn't mean they're not a great fit for another culture in the practice next door. And so just because you're labeled as toxic in one place doesn't mean you're toxic everywhere. So I wanted to point that out because I think having the label of being the toxic team member can feel like it sticks with you if that's what your employer tells you.
Well,
That doesn't mean
self-fulfilling
you are.
prophecy, right?
Yeah.
If somebody tells you you're toxic and we're firing you, well, holy Toledo, without more,
Mhm.
and doing it in a way that's not um uh disrespectful and
Yeah.
cruel, right?
Hmm.
It's a dance, and you really need to have someone in your office who is able to do these things in a way that
Hmm.
um, and not everyone has that skill set. And don't presume you do just because you own the practice. I know you probably would agree with me that a lot of owners in a practice are not necessarily the best leaders. There are other people that
Yeah.
they hire who are really good leaders. That's not their magnificence. And I always raise my hand. So when I'm doing anything technical, I raise my hand and go, that is not my magnificence. I don't have the patience. I screw it up. Then I get,
Yeah.
so I like to have people who help me do that. Since you brought it back, and I'm so glad you
Hmm.
did, to toxic, how do you handle, and this is for all the pet owners that are listening and breeders,
Yeah.
how do you handle the either the incumbent bias or the
Mhm.
toxicity that comes with an emotional client?
An emotional client. I think that we have to be mindful that the client is emotional. And so if we're in an emotional state, we're probably going to say things and do things that we don't necessarily mean. We've all said the thing we didn't mean and wish we could take back. I think recognizing that a client is in that state is probably really important to throw some comments away, right? Like, let's help them get to a state of calm. Like, let's talk a little bit slower and quieter. And, we can do things and watch body language. Like, I think that's part of my neurodivergence is not really understanding body language. So I studied body language for a very long time. But like watching how if I change my tone and inflection, does that change their body language? And if it doesn't, what else can I change to help ease the body language down into something more calm?
Yeah,
And so I'm cognizant of that a lot of the times.
it's interesting because I often when I'm asked about either toxic staff or toxic clients, I often suggest they might have something really wonderful to teach you.
Hmm.
And if you look at it that way, sort of like your gift analogy, right? If they have something to teach you, it doesn't mean you have to keep them. It just helps you understand where the bridge was built and was, 18 inches off center, right? So that's why you're not meeting in the middle, you're 18 inches off center.
Yeah.
And recognizing, well, that's because I didn't want to do it that way, or wow, I could have just shifted a little bit and we would have been together. But now we might not. I know that I have clients who are pet owners who go into orbit. And I often think if I could just shift the paradigm in veterinary medicine where we could, you and I together, could teach veterinarians how to have a listening conversation with angry clients.
Mm.
Uh, that would
I,
be great.
I should tell you, I on the weekends, so I don't know how to stay still, but on the weekends I go and I'm a vet assistant at Petfolk. So I love that. I love being in the clinic. I don't want to do it full time anymore, but I like to keep my skills sharp, stay relevant in our profession. Anyway, so I was recently, and I say recently, a couple months ago, was in a room with a client who was really emotional, getting upset. And it was obvious that she couldn't afford the treatment plan that we had talked to. The vet's getting defensive about, going into the why we should do it, why we should do it, why we should do it. And you can see the pet owner just escalating. And I just said, excuse me, doc, can I take care of this for a second? And I said, I understand. I was like, it sounds like it is a lot of money for you. And in order to maximize what we can do here for your pet, what is the kind of budget that we're looking at today? And the veterinarian was horrified that I had mentioned like how much can we spend of the pet owner's money. She was like, you can't say that. And I was like, I just scooched her out of the room for a minute. I was like, I got this. We're gonna take care of it. And that client told me their dollar amount.
Yeah.
And I said, like, I'm not trying to steal every penny of that dollar amount, but I do want to maximize what we can do for that dollar amount. And I'm going to find out what is first, second, third choice, and let me come up with a new proposal. Because I don't want the pet owner to have to decide whether or not they should do blood or X-rays. That should not be their decision in a lot of ways. It's like we're making the medical recommendation based on what you can do. Here's what we can provide. This is to maximize your dollar. And I'll tell you that pet owner walked out of there happy instead of emotionally and upset that she couldn't afford the things. And it was going to be emotional and upset about how the veterinarian was stealing money from her. And that's not at all what this was about.
It's that money talk, which is not really a class and should be in
Mm,
veterinary school, in vet tech school, maybe too, because you could help them. It's not even in really manager school,
mhm.
maybe to a better degree, but maybe not even in manager school. And clients really are getting shell shocked because I think the amount of vet care has gone up 30% in the last 5 years.
Mhm.
It's a lot. And people can't afford insurance because it's really expensive. There are different ways to pay for it. Some people don't want to go into credit, so care credit would be
Mhm.
out, and vet billing hasn't taken off as a payment plan as much as it could.
Yeah.
And annuities haven't taken off. Nobody understands what they mean, so they don't do them. But yet you could put money away and then just spend it on your
Mhm.
vet. There are ways to do it, but you're right. You just have to stop and say, and this is the hardest thing that I hear from um, clients. They just don't listen to me. And I get it because veterinarians want to help the pet, want to give the owner the total amount of information they need so they can make the best decision. And I love that you use the word and not but. And, and how can we do that in a way that has everyone leave the room saying we're doing all we can for this pet given the circumstances we find ourselves in? And I don't think that's wrong.
No, I don't either. It was interesting because in her mind, we should never, it's the old adage of like the veterinarian should never talk money or we should never talk money. It's like the truth of the fact is we talk money.
Yeah.
And we have to be comfortable talking about money. And yes, there's going to be things that we recommend that I can't afford, and I am personally going to cringe at, like if I was in their situation. But and and we know that's the right thing to do is to recommend that.
Yeah, and the alternatives, because you know what? We're not walking in their shoes. We don't
Yeah.
know what their expendable income is. We're going to
Mhm.
give them all the information. And of course, 20 years ago, we couldn't do half of what we can do now with
Yeah.
antibiotics and with chemotherapy and with everything. Um, I just, I'm hopeful that between you and I and a handful of others in the communication revenue, not revenue, but risk comes to revenue in the realm of communication, we can help veterinarians find their voice. Because I have found with my clients that they don't want to talk to you. They want to talk to the veterinarian. So the veterinarians may be able to have their managers or their techs or their front desk people carry on the initial conversation, but they're also, and I don't know how you feel about this, but they're also going to have the skill to have that conversation because some old timers want to speak to the vet.
Yeah, I think that there is a little bit of performance that happens in an exam room. As an assistant, I can say, "Oh, well, I have to play, like I don't necessarily understand what's going on because I am not the vet. The vet hasn't come in and seen it and officially diagnosed it, right? And I can't diagnose or prognose and all of the things that I can't
Right.
do as an assistant. And we respect that, but it also comes at a cost of looking like you don't know what you're talking about. And so I think once the doctor can give their official diagnosis to the client, then you can start to performatively show the client what it is you know and how you know. And your veterinarian, your practice has to give you that leeway and that leash and the training to do that. But I have been able to turn clients around way better than some of the doctors because they want to go high level. They want to talk about the
Right.
medicine and all the things, and I am the person who's not pushing it, right? I'm like, oh, here's the diagnosis, here's all the information. I get a lot more compliance, I think, as a non-veterinarian than a veterinarian, just because I can be on their level that I'm not a doctor trying to push extra treatment, which is what the label gets put on us all the time.
I know, and it really isn't fair uh
Hmm.
in the most part, most of the time. And it creates the I guess disruption of synergy between the vet and their client. And if the veterinarians can give their vet techs the autonomy, agency, and I guess respect, because often vet techs aren't seen, as you said, as partners in this
Hmm.
because they don't have the vet degree. However, they can sometimes be the best go-between, as you said.
Yeah,
And so we have to be able to not give as much information up front before the veterinarian confirms it, but once the veterinarian confirms it, being that partner with the veterinarian and with the client, it's sort of that bridge, right? That
yeah.
creates that space. It's so important. I can't believe a half hour is gone already. This is ridiculous. I can't believe it. We'll have to have you back because you and I
Wait
have
for
so
part
much to
two.
talk about. I'd love to talk to you. I don't know if you've seen the new study about time saving. It was just out. I have it on my desk somewhere, but I can't quote it right now. But the time saving that comes with having the veterinarian go in the room first with the vet tech.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly believe that. And there's
I'll
there's
have
a
to have
variety
you
of reasons
back to
why.
talk.
So let's talk
Yeah,
about it.
they said that, the having the vet tech go in and then go tell the vet and then having the vet come in and ask the same questions is like a time suck. And
Mhm.
it makes sense to me in my neurodivergent world that, yeah, that's like building a, I don't know, a zigzag instead of a
Mhm.
straight line.
Yeah.
So
Oh, well, and we just talked about that performance, right? That performance can be a lot stronger for your lay staff who can just take the veterinarian, and you could probably see more appointments if
yeah,
you could just go
that's what they
in,
said. That's what
diagnose,
they said. Yep.
prognose, and get out and go to the next one and leave all the rest to your talented team. But anyway, so that's a whole nother
That's
conversation
a
I'd love
whole
to talk
nother
to you
conversation. So
about.
how can people get in touch with you, or at least if they're in the vet world and they want to know more about neurodivergence, how would they get in touch with you?
Oh, goodness. So I am sure that you're going to put my LinkedIn profile in the show notes. So that would be the number one way that I get in contact with most people. I am working on a website. It's not 100% filled because I'm only one person, but I will eventually have a website about synaptic neuro-inclusive leadership. I'm also available at the Uncharted Vet Conference. and the community there, which is phenomenal. So that's the three ways you can find me.
Well, I'm so glad you were here with us today. I just am so happy you're out there. And as you know, anytime I might be able to be of assistance, even as a sounding board, pick up the phone and call. I'm
I
Debra
will.
Hamilton, and this is Ron Sosa. We're so glad he was here. Thank you for being with us at Why Do Pets Matter? And until next time, kiss your pets for me. The Why Do Pets Matter podcast drops every Thursday and can be found on whichever platform you find your podcasts. Subscribe now, invite your friends, and I cannot wait to have you join me in these conversations.